talking about when I worked with Family Pathways at Behavior Management Systems. That's a program where we work with the entire family because we know if a child is in need, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. So every system in their life needs to be involved. And in that program, we have the family involved. We really try to involve the school as much as possible, anyone who's in that child's life. And so, being able to have better educated teachers who really understand, and I don't mean that as teachers aren't educated, I just, in the mental health perspective, honestly having people truly have some experience with how trauma affects a child and the way they're going to react in a school environment is so powerful. Because that's where I've never had a teacher that didn't want to help the child. I have run into where they just honestly are lost. They don't understand why a child would say go to school and make things up about home in order to triangulate an environment. And that is, something that's not always easy to pick up or see. So being able to work with the whole team has really helped. Okay, what traumas have my children experienced? Wow. When we first started fostering, we got a little boy. He was 3 years old and just adorable. And I had no idea that a child at 3 years old could have learned to manipulate their environment the way he did because he had to. His survival skills were enormous. He had been beaten so severely and almost drowned in a bathtub. He had learned how to kind of work adults to get his needs met. Watching him go through some of the trauma work he did, I know he'd been through all sorts of therapy, but when they finally did Playhouse therapy with him and he was able to act out his abuse, the stuff that came out was horrific. He could never say it was him. It was always the little boy in the playhouse. But he would show you his journey and, realizing how that affected his ability to love anyone, to trust anyone was huge for us. I remember one of the social workers saying before we adopted him, can you truly love him knowing he may never, ever be able to love you back? And that was a really hard question because it was like, wow, in parenting there's that reciprocal, wonderful feeling that you get. And I know we had to kind of sit there and go. And then my husband says, well, we've been doing it for 3 years. I think we can manage to go further than that, And he was actually a child who eventually could show love. It's just not the typical way. I remember the first time he punched me and he walked across the room and his shoulders started to shake and he was crying. And he apologized to me and said, I didn't mean to hurt you. And I was so excited. And a lot of my friends are like, he still punched you. And I'm like, but he felt bad, which was huge. His ability to actually feel sympathy for someone else. And we watched him grow into someone who really could care about people. But it took a long time. My oldest son, we got him at 13 years old. He'd had 19 foster homes. He was sexually molested in 2 of them. One of them so badly he had to be life flighted to the children's hospital. When we got him, he informed us on his adoption day to remember he didn't really love us, but he was tired of moving, so we were okay. And we determined we would love him until he saw we loved him. And at 16, he screamed in my face because I told him I loved him one morning. And I reminded him that even though he was really not a friendly kid all the time, we adopted him and committed to him. And so I could tell him I loved him. Told him he didn't have to believe me and he didn't ever have to say it back, but I was going to keep telling him. And I think he finally believed I loved him when he was 21 years old and in a maximum security prison. And I was visiting him, and that was the first hug I ever got from him, was in the Sioux Falls maximum security unit. And he's 24 now, and he's working with his dad, my husband, and trying to learn how to function outside of the prison life. But I think I look back, and the question is, how has this affected my parenting? It totally rewrote it. You know, I was raised, we got spanked. I never thought that was a big deal. I can tell you we don't spank our kids because...
No, don't.
Yeah, no, we don't. Because, first of all, when someone's been beat half to death, what's a spanking?
No.
And secondly, all I'd prove to them is that every adult does hit. And so that just, there's no way that would be in any way beneficial. And I really feel like parenting is that teaching experience. And so we do a ton of redirection and reminders, you know, helping our kids cool down so that they can actually hear us. You know, walking back through what we wanted. I'll never forget one of the first times Vincent broke a major rule. And he's 14 years old, and so the expectation is, well, of course he should know that. And he broke this rule, and he got in trouble. And he looked at me and said, well, it would have helped if someone had told me that rule. And I thought, yeah, that's true. And how can we expect him to know it if we truly haven't told him that? And so, you know, with the reminders and really trying to say, this is what I expect, not this is what you did wrong. We've watched our kids learn. Even children who are pretty significantly brain damaged, they learn because we're going through what we need them to do in a gentle way and not in a screaming, awful, I'm angry way. Not that I don't have my moments. I need to go to my bedroom and have a little temper tantrum once in a while because I'm not perfect. But I know with my kids it doesn't help to yell. You know, they've come out of environments where yelling and hitting and hurting is so common. And they just shut down. As soon as you start that, you can just watch the vacancy sign go up in their eyes. They're not there. I love the statement, schools are looking at becoming trauma sensitive. I think we all have to be. You know, we've had families that are so worried about kids' grades when they first get into foster care. And I always say, you know what? At this point, we're not worrying about that. We need to get them to a point where they're safe and we have their trauma at an okay place, and then we're going to worry about grades. I mean, I love school, and I'm not saying anything, but I'm like, what's the worst thing? You know, maybe they graduate a year later. If we don't get them to a mental health spot where they're doing okay, they're not going to learn anyway. So right now we need to work with them on just feeling safe in a classroom, feeling safe with the people they're with, all of that. And I think by having all school personnel that way, I think we're going to see kids have better outcomes, because what we know, I primarily work with FASD, but it's the same thing because the way our brains work. What we know is if everyone works together and gives the same messages and helps children with using that same language, they learn, they grow, they prosper. If we're working at counterproductive ways and not doing that, then we lose a lot. And so I think, you know, being able to have everyone on the same team will see kids be a lot more successful. Mm-hmm. Have the schools my kids attended been trauma sensitive? Previously, yes. We have an all new school right now. We had 17 people quit last year. Prior to this year, I would say yes. Everyone actually looked at getting trained in the special needs of my children, and they really did an incredible job of asking us to be part of the team. This year, no, and it's been an awful year. And I just know the difference in the way my children learned and how well they did. There's such a difference. What can teachers do to help your children more effectively? I think communication with the parents and really asking about, we do a book every year for my kids, and I put the first pages, my child writes what they want a teacher to know about them.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done this with foster children too, and I've had some teachers that really were appalled because sometimes what they share is kind of hard to hear because they've been through things that is appalling to an adult. Think about what it is for a child. But I asked my kids to share the things that they really want their teacher to know about them. And then we put in there, information that might help a teacher with our child, like things we know really help them learn versus things that maybe cause them stress.
Mommy, I love you.
And then we also put, medical diagnoses with like information sheets on all of them and everything that I think would help them understand my child. I'm going to pick on some projects here. As a foster parent, I hated family timelines. I had actually a child who came home hysterical because her teacher was very angry with her family timeline. They asked her to write out the most significant dates in her life, and she did. At 3 years old, her uncle raped her. At 5 years old, her dad raped her. Her mom committed suicide at 6, and those were her significant dates. And she got in trouble for that. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it's not rosy, and it's maybe not what you wanted to hear, but when you ask her what was significant in your life, those are the things that were significant. Those projects are so hard because it does bring up trauma for a lot of foster kids. I can't tell you how many baby pictures I've stolen offline to try and give a baby picture for a child who doesn't have one, and making up something of a story because we don't know. And I understand where those projects come from, and prior to being a foster parent, I never thought anything of them. But now, those can be traumatic because they're like, I'm going to be the only kid without a picture. So I'm like, oh no, I'll find a picture. We're going to find a picture. Yeah, that looks close. But they know it's not them. And, those are hard projects. So I don't know if there's ways of doing it differently, but maybe be sensitive to the fact that not all children are going to have the same background and experience and be able to do the project the same way. And you may get information that is troubling to other students on some of those projects. What can teachers do to help you and other parents more effectively? I think the more that they learn and care and want to be trauma sensitive and sensitive to what's going on with kids, the better. I understand, like, we're all mandated reporters, but, we've talked about when kids go and tell a story. I've had one little boy who, he had a hard time because, like, he calls foster mom and dad, but then bio mom and dad are also mom and dad. And so he shared a significant trauma in his life, and everyone freaked out. The police were called. No one thought to really ask him who he was talking about. He was trying to explain about something that had happened with the bio parents. It all got straightened out, but it actually caused further trauma for the child because everyone was called in. He got pulled out to be questioned. So if there's ways of communicating, with everyone before it becomes, say that, communicating with the child had a therapist, there was a social worker that was involved already, maybe calling them first versus, going straight to, oh my gosh, this is scary stuff. And I understand as a mandated reporter, you have to make sure you're at the safety thing. But, sometimes that one extra phone call could have saved him a huge new interview over something that actually he'd already disclosed before. But, I'm not sure what else to add. I could go on for hours, but...
Well, that's one of the things is that I think so many of our teachers come from homes where safety was never an issue.
Right.
And, it's been this nurturing experience. And to know about it, kids are going through trauma is eye-opening for many of us.
Oh, I would agree. I lived in a bubble that, I had 2-parent home. My mom stayed home and was, I had that Norman Rockwell childhood. I think for me, when we first started fostering, it was so hard to hear, I had a little 2-year-old and I'm sitting there doing her hair, and she was going to have a visit with her dad, her first visit with her dad since coming into care. And she starts telling me how she really doesn't want to play his special game, but she does like candy. And I'm sitting here going, and then as she's talking about having to suck his pencil, and I went, okay, what is his pencil? And she says, down there. And realizing this little tiny 2-year-old is telling me that she's been hurt that way. That was really hard. And I think I was floored, because as a typical person, you don't see someone at that age in a sexual light. And so to think that someone has hurt them in that way is appalling. And I wasn't ready for it. One of the things they teach you is, not to react, because the child's going to think you're reacting to them. And I look back and think, oh, I did not do a great job, because I burst into tears. And, that was my first ever disclosure of that sort. And, now at work, learning to be able to turn that emotion off, because you have to, so that they can feel safe and understand that you're not judging what they're saying. But teachers are going to get that. That's, if kids feel safe with the teacher, which would be great, that's someone, who's going to get that report of, this is happening to me.
Right.
And them being able to know what to do with it, and being able to be sensitive to try not to react, because kids do internalize that first reaction as a judgment of what they've said to you. Because I would imagine teachers probably get the reports more than anyone, because that's a safe place for kids, and kids feel safe. So,
and I think in the situation with you, you provide the safe place for your kids, and you can go and talk with the teachers and be that liaison. But and in many of the cases, we have moms and dads who are abusing their children, and so then kids go to school, and so there's no support for the teacher to say, this is what's happening with my child, and this is what you can expect.
Right. Well, and it's also hard because some of those. Some of their ways of telling can be so subtle, and later, because I've had kids say, well, I did tell them, and the teachers and everyone are like, no, we would report if you told us. Well, I said that I was scared of this, or this person was mean. Well, that's such a broad statement. People go, we can't report every time someone says someone's mean.
Right.
DSS would be like, okay. But I think it's building that, rapport, and being able to really watch for those subtle signs too, because that is the problem. A lot of kids, and my kids can't sleep over anywhere, because after doing this work for long enough, it's never the people you expect who are harming kids. I think that's one of the hardest things. People want to imagine this terrible looking monster, but if you look on the sexual predator website and pull up pictures, they're all your nice looking grandpas, and people you wouldn't think twice about. They're not the scary person that you draw. And I think that's when we've talked to kids about safety. When they draw who to be wary of, they draw a monster. They don't think of some person who could be harming them. In their mind, it's this monster. And therefore, their ability to say no, and that good touch, bad touch, is kind of affected. And I think the more a school can be able to put forth some of that good touch, bad touch in learning. A lot of parents are ignorant in not doing that. It can be done in a very non-sexual way. Just, swimsuit areas are your own and no one else needs to touch them other than maybe your doctor, because that's where kids are getting preyed upon, is no one's talking about what is good touch, what is bad touch, when should you ask for help. And that's something that I didn't do as a parent right away. I didn't think about it.
Right.
And we actually had a situation where a foster child was trying to do some touching. And after that, it was like, oh, we need to be talking about this. We need to have them understand that if anyone is trying to do those things, they need to talk to someone. But prior to that, I hadn't even thought about it. And I look back and think we really should have. That was, not a good idea not to have that as a topic.
Right.
So
I know my students right now, when they're listening to this, they're going to be amazed by the number of foster children that you have worked with, had in your home, the number of children that you've adopted, some with just some incredible trauma in their background, and certainly medical issues that they're dealing with. So I know the question that they have, and it's this: how do you do it? How do you keep smiling and being positive? That's a concern from my students.
Well, I don't know. I think, both my husband and I have a lot of humor. We deal with things a lot with humor, and sometimes things happen and I just laugh and other people are like, how are you laughing? I'm like, because otherwise I'd cry, and I just don't see the point in it. The one thing that we really had to let go of is possessions. That's going to sound weird, but I remember when we got licensed, we had this showcase home. We were both working, and everything was like perfect. Brand new furniture, and the licensing worker walked through and laughed the entire time. And I'm like, why is he laughing at my house? And he looked at me and he said, it will never look like this again. And I thought, well, that was rude. And now I laugh because I have Goodwill furniture. All of my special items are in a storage unit. After the first kid came through and they got really angry and they pooped and peed all over my couch, I'm mad because that couch is expensive and it upsets me to think of it being ruined. And so after that, it was like, I don't want anything here that is going to cause me to be angry at a child when they're showing me how hurt they are. And that's the fact, is with foster kids, they are showing you how hurt they are. And I mean, one kid got so mad after a visit that he got a knife out of the drawer and shredded my couch. And will being angry at him for that help him in any way? Will it fix the couch? No. And people are like, oh my gosh, I couldn't do that. Well, you have to. You have to get to the point of, this is just the way it is. My kids with FASD are so hard on stuff, and they love to take things apart to figure out how they work, and then they can't put them back together. So, we have plexiglass in our barn. My husband just goes and cuts another sheet when a window gets broken. It's just, you have to let go of all of that. And that's something that was so incredibly freeing to me. There's nothing in my house that if someone breaks it, hurts it, whatever, I'm gonna have to be upset. And letting go of that, our behavioral stuff in our house decreased like crazy because they can feel your tension. They react to your tension. It causes them more trauma. And so I think, honestly, the day that we finally went, we're not doing this anymore. We're just going to get rid of everything that is too important to us and start over, is the day where we finally... I don't have trauma anymore because I'm like, oh, okay, that's from the dollar store. I can get another one. I probably have another one somewhere. And I have friends who are like, I couldn't do that. And I'm like, well, then you probably should never foster because, we've had it all. We've had kids who dug a hole in the wall and peed in the wall until we had to replace the sheetrock and the, the stuff that keeps your home warm.
The insulation.
Because he was being forced to go to visits and we didn't realize he came into care. for an entirely different reason. It came out that mom had been sexually abusing him, and his thing is every time he saw her, he would go pee in the wall. It was his way of trying to communicate, this is not okay with me, I am not safe. Kids will do that sometimes in the most awful of ways. And we have a poem on our wall about sometimes the most unlovable is the one who needs the love the most. And that is very true. So, there's no bad kids. There's kids that have had trauma that you wouldn't believe. And I've looked at some of my kids' history and thought, I don't know if I could have lived through that as a child. I don't know that I could live through that as an adult. And I look at these tiny little bodies that have been through all of that, and the DSM, the one thing we don't have in there and we really need is a survivor. It's not all mental illness, it's not behavior. They've learned to survive. And that hasn't always looked pretty, but they've learned how to survive.
Incredible. I love your outlook and your ability to serve kids. This is amazing, really amazing. Well, anything else that you'd want to add to our students?
So I think that's about it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks.